Coming in hot today.
I love it.
Tell me you're joking. Recording on a Monday here. I think I'm going to ditch the Monday suck moniker altogether. This whole show is a work in progress.
Increments, evolutions.
It's do you cook? Are you kitchen guy?
I actually am. I am the kitchen guy. And when I was out in Herman, I was a one-man show. I had one of the highest-rated fine dining establishments in Herman for the year and a half that I was there.
So that included relish on the hot dogs?
The bar was not high, but yeah, we did a four course seated dinner, and it was essentially almost a semi-private dining experience. It was fantastic.
Well, here's my point. I'm treating the show almost like the way that I cook. I am not a recipe guy.
Mm-hmm.
I just bring in all the ingredients, mix and match, try it next day, maybe wait a couple days. Same ingredients, but mix and match a little bit differently, right?
Yeah.
And we're kind of landing on this thing. I think we're going to get to the point where it might be, right now, ideally twice a week, somewhere Monday or Tuesday and a Friday, so that we can touch on what's going on in the world that we live in, this wild.
Are you sticking with current events?
A little bit of everything. Yeah, news.
Yeah.
I like the pop stuff, though. This is why Tom, good friend of mine, I'm sure you've listened to some of him, Tom Mudd, he comes in with he's always got the zinger. Whether it's let's talk about earthquakes in Malaysia, and then he always ties it back to real stuff. But I like that. I'm rolling us in here with an oldie but a goodie. The band is Ministry. Back to my youth. The name of the song is N.W.O. New World Order.
That's right.
And since I knew you were coming in today, I figured I'd play this because here in St. Louis we are under a
New World Order.
Bingo.
That's right.
See what we did there. So I want to jump right into it. Joining today, you guys have all checked it out already. If you're watching on YouTube, Dave and Blue,
Back.
JB and Navy and T. Tell me you're joking. I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna hit pause here on that first. A lot of things going on in the world that we all live in. But I want to start with, and this kind of kicked up last week with up in, I believe it was Wisconsin, with the DOJ arresting the judge for obstruction. ICE rolls in, in their masks and their brown pants, looking to grab another individual who is in court doing their thing. So DOJ arrests this Judge Hannah something. I've already forgot her name. Regardless, here's the point. They don't like it. They're they're trying to send a message. And just earlier today, Press Secretary Miss Carolyn Leavitt, did you know she's like 28 years old, by the way?
Good on her.
Yeah, not a lot of life there, but whatever. She's got a future in Fox. She came out, and the interviewer, or the question was basically, is the administration considering elevating their quote attack / arrests on judges that they deem are quote breaking the law in their world? And the implication was SCOTUS. Would SCOTUS fall under that crosshair? And her reply was, quote, anyone who is breaking the law or obstructing federal law enforcement officials is putting themselves at risks of being prosecuted, absolutely. I just got a million different issues with this subject. Just kind of the fact that we're at this point, one, just bugs the shit out of me. Number two, it feels as if this is just more pomp and circumstance. It's a little bit of platitudes that they can throw out these sayings, and like nobody's above the law except for January 6th rioters. And to prove it, your president is so strong, if need be, we will arrest a Supreme Court justice. I want to get your just gut reaction, just with the 10,000-foot view. Arresting judges out of this DOJ, pro or con? How you feel about it?
This DOJ or generally?
I'm going to say universally But this one in particular.
This one in particular, especially no. That's the answer. Zoom out 10, 20, 30,000 feet. The implication of saying, should we arrest judges or should the DOJ be enforcing that? The question I would have is, if not them, who else? But here's your overarching theme here is without knowing the specifics of what's going on with this, it is at face value, like, how did we get here? This is a really like concerning and horrific thing to happen. But I think if you zoom out, and this isn't whataboutism, is I think, I don't know, I'm almost 40, so I don't know if this has been happening, since day one, but on the federal and lower level courts, the question that I would have to a court historian would be, is this a new phenomenon? And let's say maybe starting let's go to the year 2000 in the Bush administration, which is sort of when I came to life. And are activist judges at the lower levels who are actively working against federal policies that are within the scope of power but simply don't comport with their worldview. Have we gotten into activist judges, which is the conservative talking point from the Obama administration, I think the liberal talking point from maybe the early 2000s, kind of post 9/11 Homeland Security Act.
Patriot Act. And so that's sort of my rationale there, is that today, no, we should not be arresting judges for a political purpose or even as a demonstrative scare tactic, which is what it sounds like when the press secretary says, if you're doing X, Y, and Z, then we have no problem coming to get you. Now, I would say there's not going to be a Supreme Court justice because they are not handling individual cases like that, where they are obstructing. They are an interpretive body rather than a, blocking and tackling judicial body. Well, I just think that you use the term activist judges. When I hear that, I think of the term fake news. Both are super simplistic, but let's be honest, they've only kind of come to fruition since 15, 16. That's just, point of order. That's when it's been brought up, and it's been brought up by this administration. It's become a rallying call. So step one is, okay, do activist judges exist? Yeah, probably. I mean, everybody's human, and they've got their political bias or their leanings, etc. But at the end of the day, they're still part of the judicial system, and there's an order to it. Not every judge is perfectly impartial, and again, I think that's exhibited just because they're human. Case in point, you take juvenile court. If there was a linear description or law, black and white as to how to handle kids, that do whatever they do, whether it's grand theft or assault, I'm talking about the worst of the worst. It would be super, super simple. But I know some of these judges, and inevitably they take everything into consideration. Parents, lack thereof, what's their environment, what have they been abused or whatever, and you could have the worst of the worst, even to the point of murder, in which judges will go out of their way to make sure they are not punished in a black and white manner, right? So here's where I'm going with this. Whatever we think or interpret or assume that, when it comes to activist judges on the left or on the right, we still have a system.
Yeah.
So if they didn't like it, DOJ, guess what? You can pull the levers. Appeal. Go to the next level. Do whatever you want to do. And in this particular case, the one in Wisconsin, if you are claiming that this individual broke the law, it's a judge. They're not hiding. They're not running away. They're not in a safe house. You telling me you can't get to a table, sit down, discuss it, warn, threat, bring in the attorneys, etc., and kind of create a process, as opposed to pulling up in a black Suburban and, alley cuffing a judge.
Well, this is going to sound like I'm being arbitrarily contrarian or just arguing the point, but at one level, I think it's important for just the general public as they're thinking about the news and they're thinking about these things. And you draw the distinction too between like a juvenile court judge and what this is, I think, presumably is a federal court judge. And so the difference being is that a federal appointment is for life, and the federal courts are really overseen and I don't want to say administered, but the connection to the Department of Justice is clear. I think it would be totally different if the Department of Justice was kicking in the door of a St. Louis City civil court judge who had presumably done the same thing. It doesn't excuse it, but I think what happens often, and I go back to, I think you brought up fake news as a talking point, and I think what fake news does is that it obfuscates what's really happening, which is the shift from kind of fact-based journalism, right? John Doe 5'8", Caucasian walking down the road at 6:05 at night has become narrative journalism, which is telling a story with the facts rather than reporting the facts.
It's all lean. I mean, whenever you have individuals like a Guntherman on Twitter and Cat Turd and all these individuals that Tim Pool, right? Take your pick.
What a story there.
Yeah, the dude gets paid literally by the Russian government, and now he's in the press pool in the White House.
There was a period though, and this is what I think. This is why I think people feel so crazy, because there was a period, Tim Pool really kind of rose to prominence as a journalist during Occupy Wall Street. And he was a pretty good left-leaning kind of countercultural, personality.
Well, back then, let's be clear though, he had an editorial board and bosses and fact checkers. So whenever he was deemed to be institutionalized or relevant, within news circles at a quote highbrow level, it's because he had bosses and fact checkers and liability that was present at all times. Tim Pool's current world, there are none. He has no, there's no rubber band on him. There's no safety net on him. And it's been proven. He didn't deny it. In fact, he had to claim it. He's receiving money from literally Russian propaganda consulting firms.
Now, how is that different than the pharmaceutical industry being the largest buyer of advertising on Fox News, CNN, etc.?
It's not. There's no difference. See, that's the one thing about me in these conversations. Yeah. Like when people, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, when people talk about grift or they talk about Wall Street or insider trading or crypto or whatever, and whenever it's pointed out what's going on with this administration, and somebody says, "Well, but Pelosi," whatever, lock her up. Like, that is my standard position. I'm just kind of at the point when it comes to news. Here's the issue. Again, you have everybody going to these independent sources. And when I hear independent news, what I really hear is no fact checking.
Is that the same as the do your own research kind of?
Yeah, it's like do
your research. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, well, okay. So and here's the funny thing, right? Okay, Grok. I continue to dip and dodge between different AI platforms, from Chat to Grok. Primarily, I use the Google platform a little bit. Grok is phenomenal. It is extremely fast. It reads your copy really well. And here's where I'm going with this. When it comes to news, like where do you go? Well, now what I've been doing is I take the subject, I put in the question, or maybe I put in the topic, and I'm like, hey, give me a quick summary of what's going on. Boom. And then it asks, do you want sources included? Yes. Boom. And it puts it all out there. And you know what I don't see in there? Cat turd. Or Tim Pool.
Have you had any issues with the AI making up sources?
Well, not at this point. I mean, because when I pull it up and I'll see some combination of whether it's Fox News to Al Jazeera. And what's really, really funny is you can put in any subject matter and you ask for the sources. And it'll give you 3 to 5, maybe 7, depending on how efficient it is. You're across the spectrum. You will get AP, you will get Al Jazeera, you will get BBC, you will get Fox, you will get, New York Post or whatever. It's all over the board. But what it's doing is it's simply aggregating, what seems to be verifiable information / facts.
Yeah.
So we've kind of jumped the shark on this one, but I think that at the end of the day, my biggest issue with the SCOTUS comment is I don't think they can't believe this internally within the administration that they would ever pick up a battle of that magnitude. I think it's purely to feed the base. I think it's smoke and mirrors because running parallel to all this chaos, and we're starting to see it. Inflation's here, folks. It's not a maybe. I'm sure you're seeing it. I'm seeing it, whether it's in the grocery. You look at fuel prices. Why is it not going down? Fuel, a barrel of WTI is under 60. It's at 62 or whatever. Well, there's big problems coming. And then the biggest problem is also the import ships, coming from China. Those are about to stop. So now they're shipping blanks for union purposes. They're literally running ocean cargo ships with nothing on them because the unions need to make sure their crews get paid. And what's going to happen is our shelves are going to start to get thinner and thinner. So therefore, here's my point.
Are you not entertained?
No, I'm not, actually. I would much rather be, whatever, put the cheap shit on the shelves at Walmart, Target, et cetera. Let people go buy their stuff, stimulate the economy that way. And let's go focus on weekend soccer games or whatever you do. Because right now, there's a train wreck coming.
So, gosh, I'm trying to remember everything you said. So going backward, there was a lot in there. So
because I want to switch topics here too. So it's SCOTUS primarily. But moral of the story is I think smoke and mirrors. I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're doing it to rile up their base, and the base is like, yeah.
That's right. That's where we started. Well, everything that I hear, particularly out of this administration, is one, rile up the base. Two, if you kind of read the tea leaves, there's some forecasting of where we're going and why. The third part to that is, I think, also to rile up the other side, the opposition, and keep them focused on a judge in Wisconsin. Well, if you missed it, and I don't know what your weekends are like, but my weekends are filled with listening to Scott Bessent talk to the International Monetary Fund. And
talk about a guy that's jumped the shark.
If you take them at their word, this is, now let's say the third move in, to be gracious, let's call it a chess game, a third move in a chess game, assuming we're playing chess, not checkers, leading up to the big, beautiful bill yet to be determined. But here's what I'll tell you overarching this. And I walked in today not being angry and worried, and here I am angry and expressing my concern. So my view of the world right now is that for the last 18 to 24 months, we've been when I say we, I mean the culture and globally, the volume has been turned up to 11 or 12 around Trump election, Trump coming back, inflation worries, X, Y, and Z. When you step back and you listen to interviews 12, 18 months ago with, global bankers, business leaders, economists, you can hear the indication that perhaps there is a recession right now. And I do think, we talk about trust in the federal government. The number of downward revisions in the job numbers that came after the Biden administration left tell a really devastating picture. And I know we've talked about this offline, but I think what we are in for right now, which locally concerns me the most, is that I think what we are seeing and what the shoe that's about to drop is the reality of a K-shaped economy, where over the last 5 years, everybody who's experienced a doubling in their 401k balance, who's enjoyed that 100% growth in the S&P and in the Dow and at 80% in the S&P, is feeling really good. And I think the last thing I saw is last quarter, luxury spending has just continued to go up and up and up, while you have the downward side of the K, which is I can't afford $5 eggs. I am pulling back on all of my spending at Disney. I'm pulling back on my spending at Walmart. I'm pulling back my spending on domestic travel. Southwest just basically said the spending has dried up. And so I think the reality is going to hit that, let's say in June, which is the wish casted number in the media now, I think we're going to have a serious issue come second half of this year
Oh my God.
where that reality hits and you start seeing.
I think that I'm 100% with you, and I think that what you're describing is there's a compounding factor that, you talk about travel, you talk about these luxury item purchases that are, seem to not be slowing down. But again, it's really hard to tell because they're really just kind of giving us these macro numbers, and it could be, 8 to 10% increase in prices of these luxury goods, but you might have a 15% decrease in units sold, right?
Yeah.
So there's noise there. But the travel thing is the one that's really, really interesting to me because we get real-time data from the airlines in their earnings calls, specifically when it comes to global travel, leisure travel, and since the inauguration and everything that has happened since, it's plummeting. The inbound tourism is spigots turned off.
Sure.
Full stop.
But also, Southwest does not have international destinations.
No, I know. No.
That number is going way down.
Yeah. No, Southwest. That's more of a telltale of our domestic economy. Mm-hmm. Completely agree. But when you look at the American Airlines of the world and the Deltas that do have international travel, and they're getting on CNBC and they're saying, look, international travel to the States is down 44%. It's down 57%. And we're expecting a steeper decline over the next 3 to 6 months. Everybody's like, oh, fine, they can stay home. We don't need those Europeans. Well, guess what? Where do they go? They stay in U.S. hotels. They eat in U.S. restaurants. They buy U.S. services and goods. Like, this is just completely short-sighted.
Now, I'm curious, though. Are they going somewhere else, or are they not traveling at all? Because that's the counterfactual is just because they're not coming here.
Yeah, no. That's been touched on in a few of the articles that I read. Again, Grok pointed out, they're not slowing down their travel. They're shifting their purchases and their partnerships, which brings me to one thing I was looking at real quickly, and then we can jump on to the next subtopic. Well, actually, I want to go ahead and switch to the next topic.
All right, let's do it. Hey, while you're doing that, do you prefer your corruption out front, out in the open, like the Trump Bitcoin, which I think maybe that's your next topic?
Oh, we can do that.
Or do you like your corruption behind closed doors, like what Doge is purportedly rooting out with all of the NGOs and stuff, or the Clinton Foundation?
Yeah, no. Here's the thing. I'm so tired of waste, fraud, and abuse, and we found all this waste, fraud, and abuse, and Doge, etc. Okay, great. Who's going to jail? Name a name. If there's so much fraud, whether it's Social Security fraud, whether it's NGO fraud, etc. Are you kidding me? Like, this administration has signal chats that are including brother-in-laws, on war plans or tax, whatever, however you want to define it. If we are that porous when it comes to legitimately serious information, and if there's so much fraud that is being claimed and brought forth and proven out to be so, absolutely true, name a name. Yeah. Don't you find it ironic that there's not a name? And oh, by the way, at the exact same time, we have all the Epstein files are in the hands of this administration. Where is it? Why is it not out there? Don't tell me, well, we're making our cases. No. Everybody on that list knew they were on that list, and they've been planning for decades in the event that this were to happen.
Sure.
There's culpability on that list.
I think I am less concerned about the tactical pieces you talked about. Who's going to jail? Who's this? Who's that? I think because the system should be working its way through that. What I'm concerned about is what it really boils down to on the systematic side, which is nobody trusts anything anymore, right? We were supposed to get bombshell JFK files day one. And it kind of came without a whimper, which presumably means it's what everybody thought it was going to be. We were supposed to get Epstein files, and we don't have that. Virginia Giuffre just committed suicide. So, key witness is no longer in the picture, and you can make what you will of that on the interwebs. On the Signal chat, though, I am also curious. So before the answer is, why are we doing this? Like, there are very strict federal regulations against this.
Yeah, they broke every rule to begin with.
But I think if you were really honest with yourself at the local, state, and federal level at the this administration, the last administration, the administration before that, and the administration before that, I think if people are honest, they would say there is a tremendous amount of avenues people take to circumvent sunshine laws, freedom of information act requests, and everything else, which again, it's not whataboutism, but it is. I think what we should be more worried about though is where is the outrage over a system that is broken versus an incident that is, call it triggering for lack of a better word, but that is catalyzing to the sentiments beyond. And that's where I think
there's a big difference between a street department contractor in the city of St. Louis getting a backhanded pile of cash compared to a Pete Hegseth sharing details on an invasion / bombing with fucking family members.
I could not agree more. But at a meta level, though, when I see it in my, I struggle with this all the time, is how much of the federal government do I really care about, because how much of that can I really put my finger on and control myself, versus when I see things like this in my backyard, when I see it in my community, when I see it then in my country, my assumption becomes, wait a minute, am I the idiot for thinking that this was all above board and running to the regulations that I get yelled about all the time about how important they are? Or do we have an administrative state that has decided that I, the plebeian citizen who pays the taxes and elects these people, am not entitled to knowing what's going on, where the money's being spent or otherwise? And I think what it leads to is, it leads to kind of down the road, and I think this is where we are, it leads you to the red hat MAGA fanatic, and it leads you to what, I don't know what the caricature is on the other side. And I think it's so important and critical that we have that conversation about everybody pumping the brakes and saying, wait a minute, this isn't about a judge. It's not about Signal. It's not about the Clinton Foundation. It's not about servers or it's not about any of this stuff. It's about the general sense that things are breaking. The people we've elected or the people that are appointed to be in charge are either so distasteful for the country or the citizens they represent that they think we are either too dumb or not entitled to this information or insight into what they're doing.
But where does that, how does that hold Pete's feet to the fire at all for any of the transgressions that he's executed?
It doesn't.
Okay, but shouldn't we expect more out of the Secretary of Defense?
So here's the thing. I think the reason you're not seeing feet held to the fire is because I think it's sort of, I think we touched on it before. If everyone was very honest, this has happened. It's happening today. It happened yesterday. It happened a year ago. It happened 5 years ago. It happened 10 years ago.
Well, hold on though.
And so
I'm not going to acquiesce on that one, because let's go with Biden years. The Secretaries of Defense is including the hospital stay, right? All these things. This stuff was. We did not hear about things that were happening. We did not hear about bombings that were occurring. And let's be clear, we were bombing everybody all the time. That has not stopped since 9/11.
Well, wait a minute. But
no.
But would they have reported on it if they did?
No, it doesn't. No. Here's the thing: they didn't need to report on it because the things they were doing were within their channels of keeping the fucking press out of it and keeping family members off of Signal chats. And oh, by the way, they weren't using Signal chat to communicate.
Ooh. Are you sure?
I'm going to guess that if they were better at it than this administration.
So
okay?
Yeah. So let me be shocked by that. Wait, hold on. Let me be shocked by that statement though, because just because I'm better at cheating and I'm still cheating does not then excuse the fact that somebody.
That's not where I'm going with this. That's not where I'm going with this.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, let's go prior to Trump 2.
Okay.
Over the past 20 years. Let's go
Obama 2 and Trump 1. How about that?
Obama 2. Okay, so where are you going with this? Because what I'm looking at is unprecedented stupidity.
Yes.
From cabinet officials.
Yes.
And a president that in this first term realized that his turnover made him look feckless. When he constantly was turning over cabinet officials, basically it was all admissions of failure. That's what that means.
Kind of.
You hire somebody, and 4 months later, nah, you're really not the Secretary of Defense I want. Or, yeah, I need new transportation.
So are we talking about cabinet level competence, or are we talking about a culture of obfuscation and subversion of regulations regarding storage of documents and communications? Because
Two totally different things.
correct.
Well, let me dumb this down. Do you think this administration, this cabinet in particular, Secretary of Defense specifically, do you think he's capable and competent?
I have no idea.
Well, no, you're not getting off.
Hey, I got
no.
points. So one, I don't know. All I know is what's being told to me, and I am not.
They admit it. Their own words is yes, this happened.
Yes, it happened.
And we saw the screenshots.
Well, let me get to 2 to 5. So one,
keep
I don't
this to
know.
3.
2 is that yes, it happened. Should he? If I was in his position, I would say I need to not be in this position because the Secretary of Defense has to be somebody of high integrity and high leadership. And if a leader gets caught in the act like that, you get to fall on the sword and you get to go. So that I think reflects though what you're talking about, which is do we have I don't want to call it nepotism, that's not it, but do we have a cabal of people who is running the government that is below our expectations of the office? Yes, most certainly. The third point is, and it's halfway to whataboutism, but it's also but I don't know that we can be so certain that just because we're not getting this public and highly contentious issue being plastered on the news, that this is not something that is happening in the past or otherwise. And frankly, it just got
but that's an assumption.
Nobody wanted to embarrass.
That's an assumption though, because it never
that's why
never made the news.
That's why it's the third point.
So so here's the thing though, their transgressions made the news. They put it out there. Even Fox News covered it ad nauseum, right?
Yeah.
So nobody's denying this shit has happened. Nobody's denying they broke their own protocol. Nobody's denying that technically, if anybody else within the Secretary or in the Defense Department would have done the same thing or originated it, their own words, they would be locked up, right? Okay, so all of this is known to be definitively true, and this administration has said, nope, that's our guy.
And I think for that, we should all be outraged, and I couldn't argue that.
So you asked, you started the question off with, would you prefer your corruption hidden or public? The crypto dinner, 220 of the largest token holders of Trump meme coin have been invited to the White House. There's just 1,000,001 issues with this whole subject matter. Number one, it is a completely non-regulated asset. Number two, due to that, the crypto wallets that have been tracking into it have been tracked to North Korea, to Russia, to Saudi Arabia, to the usual suspects. Number three, when an individual is the president, and I don't know the exact wording, but bottom line is you're not supposed to do anything else. You are not supposed to have businesses or grift for your own self-value / interests. He is trading this thing on a daily basis. He's inviting his token holders. Where does this just strike you from a headline standpoint?
Is it going to be a masquerade party?
I don't give a fuck what it is. You're talking about, on paper, he has amassed roughly $12 to $14 billion in wealth because he is the president of the United States, and he is taking money from foreign adversarial individuals in foreign adversarial countries. That if we are to believe that there's no influence involved with this money, then how fucking stupid are we?
So I think back to the line in The Big Short when Steve Carell was saying, why are they admitting to this? And his partner says, they're not admitting to anything. They're bragging to you.
No, of course.
And I think the way I think about that is we should take it for what it is. And when they show up for the dinner, we will either be nonplussed by the fact that it's a bunch of kind of crypto bros with no influence, or we should be shocked at who shows up.
But this is coming, the people that are apologizing for this are also the people that freak out over a $50,000 bump in a Pelosi trade. $50K. Trump made $100 million in transactional fees in the first quarter off this coin alone. primarily derived from his base, who are middle income and down. He's grifting them. So
welcome to late stage capitalism. I guess it's a pleasure to have you here.
let me ask you this: should it be illegal?
For sure.
I mean, it is illegal. Should he be
so
prosecuted by the SEC that he's gutted?
I want to see equal outrage from the red hat MAGA baby boomers who were incensed by the Lincoln bedroom scandal during the Clinton administration. I think
Two totally different things.
I think it is in the same. It rhymes. Two different things, but it rhymes. But I think
Blowjob and crypto.
No.
Rhyme.
That's not what it was. The Lincoln bedroom scandal was during the Clinton administration.
Oh, renting the room out
to his wealthy donors. And
sure.
So and I think the other thing is
who were Americans.
The numbers to me don't really matter anymore because I think we've lost sense of scale. And I think, a billionaire today was a millionaire in the 90s. And I think the scale, I think we've just lost the message on the scale. And like I said, I would rather see, one deviation away from the bell curve equally as outraged over the same things where at least we're intellectually consistent, which is what would allow us to actually have a discussion about what do we actually think about this and what might we do to prevent it. But I think what we're seeing, and I think we've seen it for at least 15 years, is we are doing this facade of outrage in a lot of cases because when our guys in there, we're kind of taking notes on what we can and can't get away with.
But can we fundamentally disagree that there's a mountain basin of difference between renting a room out to a donor to the tune of, $50,000, $100,000, $150,000, whatever it was, and accumulating $12 billion plus from foreign.
Yes, but and the but is there's only one hotel room, and I got a global digital platform, and I think if given a global digital platform in the early 90s, we have seen some of the same.
I'm not giving anybody a pass on it. Like, I'm a firm believer in the oh my God, America First. What's the legislation that allows for unlimited?
Citizens United.
Yes, thank you. Overturn it, burn it, take it all down.
Sure.
But what we're seeing now, to your point, and you again going back to the way you originally framed it, this particular administration, they're throwing it in everybody's faces. They are literally saying, "We are breaking the law. Check it out. We're having a party with a bunch of lawbreakers." In ourselves.
Well, let me ask you a different way. I said, is it a masquerade party? And one of the promises of digital currency was anonymity and a digital ledger. So you had this digital certainty across borders and also an anonymity. When the actual reality, though, is that the only reason it's not a bigger issue is because you can track who holds the wallet. Now,
right.
Whether that gets transferred or otherwise, I'm not the crypto bro to ask, but I think it's actually pretty transparent. And so I think the grift is out in the open. The players are out in the open. I think from an A to B, it all rhymes. And the question is, am I more outraged with the idea that somebody has grifted $12 billion from people that are presumably easily identified, or am I more outraged at what is cast as the theft of all the NGOs with USAID and otherwise, which I'm not saying it's the same, or am I more outraged by, the local building inspector who pockets an envelope full of cash? And I think the answer is, what it should tell us is that the fact that we don't have a national outrage over the implication of the Secretary of Defense or the senior executive, the president of the White House, doing these things, and we're all just kind of like, I guess, it should give us more pause about like where we're going and our ability to actually do like anything as a culture, especially if we go back to where we started is, if the tide is receding and this tsunami is about to hit, when there is a real crisis or there is a real financial downturn, is it going to be the Hunger Games? Is it going to be the Handmaid's Tale? What movie are we going to be watching in 12 to 18 months?
Well, don't you find it funny that, and this is not the first time I've heard those two movies as an analogy as to what we are experiencing, and I've heard it from left, right, and center across the board. Don't you find it really fucked up, though, that we have an administration that's literally putting those types of ideas or potentials in our heads because of the actions that they're taking?
Well, but you remember The Handmaid's Tale came out in the Obama administration on Hulu.
Totally understand. But it wasn't about Obama.
I'm not implying that one bit. Yeah.
Yeah. No. It's trended. Yes, it came out during the Obama years, but it made its money during Trump won.
I'll go meta on you. I think fundamentally, I'm a geriatric millennial, and I think fundamentally what's happening is you got to go back to the early 2000s. You got to go back to the Patriot Act, and you have to go back to this sense and this prevalence of government intrusion into communications and secret courts, the FISA court, and terror plots, and if you remember watching the news in the early 2000s, it was condition orange every day, as though there was some imminent threat. And I think what we're seeing is the longitudinal impact of what that means what it means to grow up in a culture like that. And I think this is the outcome of 20 years of paranoia, and what you have from, let's say, 2007, when Facebook went public outside of universities, until now, the increasing rapidity and pace, and the increased compartmentalization of cultures. So your algorithm is different than mine, but I'm in the same algorithm with a lot of other people who think and look and act the same way that I do based on our digital patterns. And so what I'm experiencing in the world is totally different from yours, even though we can be sitting in the same room. And I think that is so destructive and damaging, but nobody's quite willing to make the sacrifice. Well,
that's a full circle point, though. We kind of alluded to it earlier with the death of kind of traditional media, news, et cetera, in which you had newsrooms and you had editorial boards and you had everybody kind of fact checking to a degree. And you had fluidity amongst those institutions in which individuals would go from one job to another and, go for a pay raise from ABC to NBC or vice versa, or from CNN to Fox and vice versa. We don't have any of that.
Well, I'll tell you, I think where it even broke for boomers is, if you go back, I think a lot of boomers realized, let's say in the last 15, 20 years, that the news media that they grew up and respected was approved media. We had 3 channels that everybody watched, and there was a great deal of government influence and collusion in the message that the American people were getting. And so
I don't know about that. I mean, that feels way more like a right-wing conspiracy in hindsight at this point, because, growing up in the 80s and 90s and watching the Tom Brokaws of the evening, and I would like to believe that I was fairly educated, read a lot, had a degree in political science, traveled the world, saw all these things. When they talked about the fall of the Cold, of the Berlin Wall, I was there a few years after, talked to the people that lived it. There was never a disconnect. There was never some aha moment where you're like, oh my God, Tom Brokaw's been lying to me.
That's fair. And
this all came about because Trump needed it to be an enemy in 15 and 16. That's what he did, because he was breaking the Republican Party at the exact same time, and he understood media better than Republicans and Democrats.
Gosh, I think you are correct that that's when it broke, and I think.
He broke it. I don't think it was broke. I think it was fine. I think it was operating.
No, all I got to point.
I would say bring proof to the table, because it's like
Charles Coney. Do you remember the Charles Coney outrage on Facebook? So
not anecdotal. I went large scale.
So if you go back to early Facebook and you look at Upworthy and the Charles Coney documentary, that everybody was in uproar. And gosh, this must have been 2009 or 10 or something like that. We've got to get this warlord with all the child soldiers, Charles Coney. And it was a big thing, and it was, you had this kind of weird moment where there was a lot of troubling things happening in Africa, right? You had Boko Haram, Bring Our Girls Home. You had Charles Coney. You kind of have all these things, and in hindsight, you look back and you're like, wow, that was really the first social media zeitgeist towards what was a unifying, but also, if you look at it conspiratorially, as this was the first real social media test of what is our power to capture the attention of a youthful, energetic group and funnel their attention towards a specific issue, and then just leave it to spin off into the galaxy while we pivot to something else. And I think in history, in the longitudinal history, I think people will look back at that as one of the one of the first.
Yeah, but what's
coordinated-
the moral of the story though for those
I
for
think-
myself and those
yeah,
listening?
I think the moral of the story there is that it is very easy to look at Trump as being the one who broke it, and I don't think that is untrue.
But it was
but I think you have to recognize that if you think of time in history as a stick with pressure on it, I think from the early 2000s, post 9/11 era, technology, news media, etc., and frankly just education and all of these things, they were putting pressure on the stick, right? And then Trump came in and just slapped both hands and snapped it. And then I think we're all looking, like, I think people are still in shock about what has happened, and then also what happens when you take the guardrails off on both sides.
Yeah, it's the Roy Cohn effect. And I've mentioned this in a previous podcast. Roy Cohn is Trump's idol, and he's a mob boss, basically. Simple as that. How can you make sure that you're never wrong? Just never admit you're wrong. You know,
You don't get any complaint from me. I like that. Yeah.
But I don't like that in a president. I don't like that in an elected leader. No. Because it's like at some point, that the reality of our worlds needs to be real.
But how many people in your day-to-day life?
But hold on. Let me just add just kind of like a point of reference. Last Wednesday, Trump's like, "Oh my God, look, drill, baby, drill. We're doing it. Gas is $1.98 a gallon." A complete fucking bald-faced lie. AAA and every other metric says, no, we're at $3.15 nationally, right? And his base shared that shit over and over and over again on their news feeds, and it became true, even though it's not true, right?
Let me ask you a question: is there a place where gas is $1.98?
Show me.
That's my question. But I would.
No. Don't make an excuse.
I'm not making an excuse.
No, that's what that was.
No, I think this is exactly what you were talking about, which is
he lied.
I'm sure there is one place where the gas is $1.98, even for one brief moment, as like some local gas station sale, right? Just take that for example, and I think so. That is not a false statement.
Yes, it is.
But it is a
no. The implication when the president sits in front of the podium at the White House and addresses national gas prices, and they throw out a number, it is 1,000% assumed that is our national average. That's where we're at.
I totally agree.
So what
you're missing is the message, though. The message is, I think this is the culture we've gotten into, where we are taking this singular instance where I am not 100% factually wrong, but I'm letting the masses.
No, don't say masses. Say base.
I'm letting base or anybody else. I mean,
because the masses that are generally educated, the majority of the mass, 64% of the mass, didn't vote for him, gets it, and they all know $1.98 is a lie.
Based on what they assume.
It's
a lie based on the assumption that the inference should be the national average.
Doge. On Monday, he said Doge is up to, $280 billion in savings. If you know what, I'll look it up right now as we're talking here. If I go
I'll agree with you on this. Is show me.
Doge.com savings. Estimated savings to date, he said 280. Doge's own number is 160, but they don't have a list of the savings. So again, his own people are saying, nope, that's not the number.
I would be willing to bet
he lies.
Some economic development math going on there, which is
no. This is not 4D chess. This isn't even checkers. This is like go fish.
I think calling it a game, it diminishes people's ability to understand what's actually happening and what they should really be concerned about.
Well, I have a theory there. I think he knows exactly who is playing the game on his side, and they're not smart, and they're believing it. These are the same people that believe $1.98 is the new price of gas, and ignore the fact when they fill up their F-150s, that they're paying $3.20.
But I think didn't we just go through 4 years during COVID, and I think the same thing could be said if I am taking the counterfactual point there. I think the group of people that you said is unintelligent and doesn't know what they're doing.
Not all of them. I don't.
Yeah, I know. I think
a large percentage.
I think there is an equal percentage. I think there's an equal percentage of those people who think that we went through the last 4 years watching the same thing on a totally different set of issues for people who are now armchair doctors, armchair
Yeah.
attorneys, armchair scholars, and otherwise.
Well, while I am not a DNC fan, and those of you that know me know that I am not an apologist for them at all, you can still look at the last 4 years, and you can look at any chart on any of these metricable items, from fuel to food, etc., and you will see things going in the right direction. You'll see the market going in the right direction. You'll see unemployment going in the right direction. These macro facets, but the feeling and the reality of the voter said otherwise, and the Democrats couldn't figure that out. Now, here we are in a world in which now we're seeing the charts go in the opposite direction, and this motherfucker's lying about it's continuing to improve. I have moral issues with that. I have public issues with that. I have, professional issues with that, because it's lies.
And I think we all should. I don't think that any of us should be sitting here doing anything other than saying, why am I incensed about this today? And is there a time in the past when I may have overlooked a lesser transgression that has allowed the zeitgeist and the culture to get us to this point?
Give me an example, because I know that you like going back and forth on these things for reference. Under the Biden years, give me a case in point where you believe that the Biden administration lied about said policy as far as what was the reality in said marketplace or value.
I don't think that there is a apples to apples comparison, but I'll give you the same. You have to look at it's the vibes, right?
Well, I'll give you one. Border immigration.
Sure.
Biden administration was like, yeah, we know what's going on. They didn't know what was going on. Yeah, right. They
totally agree. I think the same thing can be said. You mentioned the economic numbers, and what I would tell you is, cheap money allowed for inflation and asset growth. And if you were on the YouTubes, all you heard for 4 years was assets, assets, assets. That's why we have a K-shaped recovery. That's why we have the price points we have now. We have a wealth effect that has been driven. I think I shared this last time, the narrative economics of things are good. And this is where we're splitting hairs, but when you have an entire year of significant downward jobs revisions by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is that fake news? Is that a lie?
But even after the revisions, it was still moving from a zoom out 4 year time span in the right direction.
Well, okay, but is a higher percentage of the population having 2 jobs showing full employment a plus, when the reality is, if you went back and you said, if everybody only had 1 job,
now we're getting in the weeds. Do I think people should have to work 2 jobs in order to make that number make sense?
Yes.
No. And at the same time, I don't like whenever the top 1% has an effective tax rate of under 5%.
But the implication of we are at full employment is that everyone has a job, and not everybody has 2 jobs, and therefore we're at full employment to make ends meet. If we're at full employment the way people assume we're talking about it, it's I have a job, and if I were fired today, I'd be able to walk out the door, walk next door, and get another job, because the demand for labor and talent is so high that the market is good. And I think if you asked any 100 people on the street if they felt like that in the last 4 years, outside of highly compensated remote workers, etc., I think the sentiment would be no. I have felt very concerned because things are getting more expensive, and but for low interest rates and my own consumer habits, it has been a very tumultuous time. And
but that group that you're talking about, low interest rates, really didn't help them. And the reason is they could never accumulate enough equity in order to put something down to buy the golden goose, that being a house or an apartment or whatever.
That's correct. So what I don't want to hear from is people who are saying, Trump is tanking the stock market. It's down 5%. My 401k is suffering.
Oh, I've switched on that. He's manipulating the stock market. He's not tanking it.
Regardless, though, I think regardless, though, I am so sick and tired of hearing from people who have benefited grossly in historical context from low interest rates, loose money, asset appreciation, valuation appreciation, etc.
So then
telling me about how they just don't understand why anybody could think this economy is anything but great when I can walk 5 blocks that way.
So then can we reasonably assume that we're on the same page then when it comes to the Federal Reserve and Trump's hard-on for Powell and crew, that he needs to leave them alone? And if they need to raise rates, so be it, because the Federal Reserve They are the ones, in my opinion, and I've said this in the past on Facebook and a number of other platforms. You start with the banking collapse in 08, 09 and the housing burst, right? The Fed, what they did, immediately following is they aggressively reduced rates consecutively for the next 8 years plus, and it ran us into, so all the way through Obama, we saw the Fed rate dropping, and not a coincidence. Individuals like yourself, even myself, right? Real estate and development, and everything's booming, right? And then you have a big group of people that are going out and getting zero interest or interest only loans, and and everything's flying. Trump rode in on that, right? And now the only thing that dude cares about when it comes to the market is the Federal Reserve. He wants Powell to drop rates.
Well, are we talking about Trump 1 or Trump 2?
2. He just said it.
Well, but Trump 2.
And then the market reacted, and he's like, well, wait, I take it back.
Well, yeah, so Trump 2 did not ride in on low interest rates.
No, that's not what I said. Trump 1 did.
Trump 1 did. Yes, I totally agree. So again, you have to go back, right? So go back in time, if we're talking about 08, go back in time. When Paul Volcker raised Fed funds rates to get inflation under the control, he was willing to inflict a great deal of pain on the economy because you had an independent Fed. I don't recall when the dual mandate came in. So that's kind of number one. So that's what allowed the Fed to raise rates, because they were in control of the money supply. The fast forward to 08, and what most people don't remember, so part of the global financial crisis in large part started in the early 90s. And what I mean by that is Congress had its hand in housing policy, in particular with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and everything else.
Yeah.
And what Congress did, and because those organizations are a government-sponsored entity, Congress said, we need regulations that will help facilitate increased home ownership. So Fannie Mae scratched their head and said, how can we do that? And what happens, though, is Fannie Mae conforming loans in a vacuum should only impact those Fannie Mae's. However, all of the other banking institutions basically match those.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting into the weeds on a whole other subject matter.
Well, but wait, this is context though. So
dual mandate, 1977. We've been at it for almost 50 years.
And this is where I think the Fed is trapped, right? So the Fed is trapped, and where I think, where Trump is too simplistic about this is, and I think maybe that's I don't know if that's for public consumption or inside, right? Where Trump is too simplistic is saying, well, the Fed should just lower interest rates. We've had low interest rates, but we also have not had upward employment growth in the way that we would want.
No, totally.
And so inflating assets more is only going to exacerbate inflation.
Well, it feeds the boomers' need. Because who are the ones sitting on the property?
So my tinfoil hat on this is that I have sincerely felt since 08. I don't know if we really fixed the structural pieces in the financial market. It's really not that important. But I'll tell you what, the articles that we don't see anymore are the pension funds in Chicago being underfunded by tens of billions of dollars, because presumably we've inflated those assets so much that our concerns are not quite there. Now, my concern would be is that we should still be really diligent on these things that are very serious problems. But this wealth effect is creating an incentive to ignore those things.
Yeah, the Illinois pension, that's a statewide pension issue, and that's all the irony of that is it's predominantly servicing conservative boomers that live downstate, because it's all the teachers, it's all the street workers, etc. So everybody wants to point to Chicago and say Chicago's broke. No, Chicago's broke. That was broke because it's paying all the other people that hypocrites is what it is.
Do you think that's what's driving Indiana's invitation for Chicago counties to join the state of Indiana?
No, I think what that is no different than Trump 28 hats. I think it's all bullshit. I think it looks good on Twitter, gets people fired up. I mean, the Republican Party is just getting to the point where they are the party of cruelty, is my new take on it. They're not coming up with new ideas. They're not creative. When you talk about interest rates and housing and Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and all these other things, I think you and I both agree we have a significant housing shortage. We have affordable housing shortage. And I'm not talking about Section 8. I'm talking about just good starter homes for new young workers, families, etc. We have a significant gap in that world, right? And I'm not a Harris fan, but I will give her credit that she did lay out a plan that was roughly 3 pages of detail in which here's how we're going to approach 15 million new houses. And it was this combination of trades engagement, credits, builder credits, things like that. We're going to work on lowering the NIMBY restrictions that were, closer to, quote, federal property, things like that, so that they could increase it. What was it a great plan? I don't know. We would never know, but it was a plan, right? And it was in conjunction with, instead of us focusing on just giving you the top 5%, which, home builders, those are rich dudes. Instead of just giving you a bunch of tax cuts and hoping it trickles down, then you build more houses, and please make sure that there's some affordable houses thrown in there. They said, look, we're going to keep this, the plane a little bit higher, but if you want to get these credits, here's the quid pro quo, right? This administration there's no plans. There's no strategy that's laid out there. The approach to the tariffs, we've seen it now. We've seen enough. We know what's happening. We're seeing the increases. I've got manufacturing friends that importing new gear and tools and supplies. Shit's gone up a lot. Being close to the music industry, having a lot of, I buy gear all the time on Sweetwater. Well, where do you think all these components come from? It's all China, right? These prices are skyrocketing. There's no solution. And two, you were talking about, why are we counting this person with 2 jobs as a full employed individual, right? Okay, so we're still at 4% unemployment, 4.2%, whatever it is.
Unless we use the old employment measures and the U6, and then we get a different number, but that's a rabbit hole.
Okay, so let's double it. Let's say the real number is 8%.
Sure.
Who's going to work these manufacturing jobs?
The Helix humanoid robots, which is
right.
So
which is not your neighbor.
No. So here's what I'm curious about too. So as you're saying all this, I'm thinking to myself, would I rather live in a cruel, incompetent republic, right? Late stage Rome, corruption in the republic, or would I rather live in a soulless, technocratic bureaucracy? And I'm not sure I like either one of those choices, but I think the reality is that the average of those 2 places looks a lot like Idiocracy.
Yeah,
and I think that's sort of where we're at. I mean, I think I was stunned. I forget if we talked about this or not. I was stunned when Jon Stewart did an interview with Ezra Klein, and he talked about how, kind of flippantly, yeah, the reason why a lot of our progressive policies didn't work is because we couldn't just solve one problem. It's got to solve social justice, climate justice, economic inequality, wage gap, et cetera. And so we end up with this whole regulatory scheme that means it takes 30 years to build a power plant when it takes China 30 days, right?
Yeah.
It was what struck me about it was I was excited at the recognition, but the glibness of this insight that, by the way, has been pointed out in great detail by, I think, well-meaning conservatives and liberals for a long time, who've said, look, why does it take us 30 years to build a power plant? Or why does it take us 15 years to get the approvals to do a refinery? And so the glibness with which I think the intellectual class and the affluent, we'll call it the intelligentsia, right, reveals these things as somehow they've landed on it, when people have been screaming about this for decades, to me is so infuriating, because what it means to me, and I'm realizing in my later years I'm going the opposite way. I'm getting more progressive as I get older, because again, I look to the north here and I think, how many years have people suffered in inner cities and rural communities because of the glibness of the intelligentsia class or the bureaucracy, and saying we're working on these really complicated problems. They've increased the complexity to give themselves more bandwidth to work on these problems. And meanwhile, the price tag and the timeline goes up. And then all of a sudden, it's what you're saying is, guess what? Now, what do we get? We get data centers that create not really that many jobs. We're going to get humanoid robots. We have people who don't really even know how to do things anymore. And then we're trying to use old methods to teach them how to do the same thing and new things.
You're not going to get an argument out of me on that front, because the Democratic Party for a long time, suffice to say. While well-intentioned, it's the whole, if there's 100 people that are starving, Democrats are willing to feed them all, and potentially a couple that didn't need it. Whereas on the flip side, the Republican ideology is more like, no, let's not do that because we might feed a few that don't need it. It's like I would rather be on the side of, I'd rather help more, along the lines. Now, here's the issue, though. It's the activation. They're not pulling it off, and constantly creating barriers to entry for the sake of, quote, good or moral balance or whatever the reason is. It's very short-sighted, and the Republicans figured that out. Now they don't have any solutions. All they do is they make everything about pronouns, anti-pronouns, right? Because when you really zoom out at this point, we're over 100 days in. There was more than 2 years prior to the election of opportunity in which he could lay out his actual plan, strategy. You and I both know we saw nothing. We heard a lot of big talk about the border immigration and tariffs, and to a degree he's implementing those. But the tariff side of it, what did he do? He came out on Sunday saying, we've already collected $140 billion in tariffs. And now, in the meantime, since this all started, our deficit has increased by $250 billion. But that 140 or 50, whatever it is, I forgot who it was, said, okay, well, that's 140 billion in taxes that the American people weren't paying last year. Which is like, that's true too. So let me play a little game here with you, and we're running into the tooth a little bit. 100 days in, what has he done that's benefited you?
Nothing, absolutely nothing. And I'm unbothered. I'm not even bothered by that. And I think fundamentally, I always try to remind myself the federal government was designed to not do very much. And so for that,
but that's not what he ran on.
I totally get it. So you're asking me if you've done anything for me. So
let me zoom out. Okay, well, let's do this quickly. For you directly, the answer is no. What about you tangentially, your circle, maybe your community? Are you seeing a fallout or a benefit from the administration and any of the actions that they've taken that has made things better? Or, maybe even on the flip side, is somebody who lost funding, or, maybe is there a nonprofit in the area or a school or whatever? What are you seeing?
So I'm seeing a lot of organizations that have lost funding, but for that, I'm not going to say thankful. For that, I am encouraged because, out of chaos comes a demand for innovation. And I think I'm unbothered by it because, one, I cannot control this huge federal bureaucracy. It's beyond me. So my outrage is better spent, or my anger and creativity is better spent saying, I'll give an example. If an organization in St. Louis lost their federal funding, the first question I need to ask is, that's interesting. Should the federal government be collecting dollars and nickels from across the country and sending them to this organization? And the answer may be yes, the answer may be no. But then the subsequent question is, okay, if we lose the federal funding, that should expose a weakness in our business model that we took for granted. Now we need to think about what our work is right now, does it need to change, and is there a civic way locally to do this? And so the bright side of all the chaos to me is that I am hoping, but I am not seeing it, that more leaders, more frontline employees, more investors, more high net worth individuals look around and say, wow, I was sort of sleepwalking for a long time about the things that I take for granted that exist in my community. And maybe I need to get more involved. Maybe I need to set a check locally. Maybe I need to figure out more ways to do things in places that are disinvested instead of saying somebody should really do something. We need a policy, or I hope there's a leader with a vision, which is a great segue into where we are now, which is I think fundamentally what America has lacked for a long time, and what we lack locally and what we lack as a state and I think it's a focal point is, where are we going? Why do we exist? Who are you going to become when you are in this place? And the answer in most places is you are going to come here and get spun into oblivion because there's no direction or focused energy on a charted path or a list of priorities or a sense of direction that allows me to buy in and say, despite the bumps, I am on a long road to somewhere, instead of a twisty, pothole-filled, sinkhole-defined wasteland to nowhere.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack. I just think it's to a degree simpler. I think that the cuts have been largely ill thought out, rapid, not really evaluating in game. I think they were just simply, we need numbers.
Yes.
And it's all in anticipation of this great big budget bill, which is code for tax cuts, and we're not going to cut our deficit. I mean, we all know that. They know that. That's their own numbers. We're going from 36 to 56 in 10 years.
I'm sure that's actuarial math, which is, it is what it is, but I agree. I don't think it's going to be, we're not going to see it day to day and say, wow, we've really made progress. Look at that. What's the tracker in New York, the deficit tracker?
Oh, yeah.
That number's not going to start going down. It's not going to go in the opposite direction.
No, it's going to speed up. And I think about it like, cancer having hit my family hard. Why can't they why couldn't he have gone the other way? Like, this guy's an egomaniac, right? He loves the credit for, warp speed, even though now it's like, no, we don't want to talk about that. But warp speed's his baby, right? Instead of cutting, 5 million here from this institution, 10 million from that one, and accumulating all up, these colleges were taking back $50 billion in tax dollars. What if you did this, Trump? What if you said, you know what, I'm going to spend $100 billion. I'm going to give it to the top 10 institutions in the country. It's a race, cure cancer.
Because $75 billion of that would have gone to overhead if you looked at some of
No,
numbers, right?
that's dicing hairs, though.
I agree.
The principle is simple. If the intention as a leader is to make things better, to improve, because to say, well, I don't believe in big government, I want to be the leader of the free world, but I really don't want us to do anything. Well, then that's just kicking the can down the road, because your idea is not an idea. It's a disappearing act.
Sure.
And at the exact same time seems to be the path that this administration is taking, they're actively creating self-worth, value via crypto. And look, Galloway nailed it. What happened on the 90-day pause day when you look at the calls and the puts in the preceding 3 to 4 hours prior to that news conference? You saw the largest one-day transaction of insider trading that has ever occurred in the history of the markets. That's what happened that day. And and to think realistically, because the Democrats have no backbone right now, nobody's going to see jail time on this thing. It's like, here's my point. He's not doing anything to make us better. He's not doing anything to move us down the road. There's a way to make government more lean, more efficient, to a degree, even smaller, while still focusing and admitting these are things that we need to improve upon. Don't cut $50 billion in cancer research, double it, but put new rules on top of it. Put expectations on there, whatever you need to do. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I don't disagree. So let's pivot a little bit more locally, right? So we had an election in the city about a month ago. We had
a blowout.
A blowout. We have a county executive election coming up next year with some interesting dynamics in between. Overarching that is, we think about the $1 trillion federal budget. How about the Rams settlement money? How about the way that we are going to go about in the next 4 years in the city of St. Louis, and then with the next county executive, whomever that might be? How are we going to settle the rancor in St. Louis County? And I guess I live in the county, and so I'm very curious how we're going to keep them from wasting all that Rams settlement money and 10 million here, 10 million there. And how are we going to start casting a vision for the city of St. Louis? Which we were told there was one, but I have yet to hear a vision that includes, St. Louis will be X, Y, and Z. I think I've heard a lot about we're going to get things working right and we're going to get the potholes fixed. But there really isn't a aspirational vision of what is emerged out of the experience economy to become the transformational economy is defined by who will you become when you are here? Is it, what do you think?
Well, I think April was April 6th. We're 22 or so days past that election. I wasn't a big fan of the lack of vision or campaign ideology as it pertained to what would come next if I voted for A or B. And in the case of Cara, Cara had the advantage of simply not being Tashara. Like, this was one of those elections where, like, I just don't want to be that person. And the one little town hall I went to, it was all about services, trash and potholes. And I was snoring. Like, I get it, but if that's what you're running on, that's like an accountant, creating a new ad campaign in which they tell everybody we're really good at taxes. Guess what?
Right.
We kind of expect that. So I think now, in looking at the players that are in the camp, within Cara's inner circle, the lack of press, the lack of getting out in front of anything other than a sinkhole with Wesley Bell, and mind you, that was no normal sinkhole. You see that from space. It is a little fearful. I am fearful that, here we go. We're sitting in neutral, and we do have this Rams money. We do have leftover ARPA money. There's cash on hand to do some big things. And even if it's just a PR campaign, I don't care. Do something.
Yeah.
But don't just focus on these things that are literally behind the curtain that you should be doing anyway, and then claiming those as these monstrous victories, that are going to somehow move the city forward. It's not.
You know a lot more people than I do in important places who have more important conversations than I do. What is your take, or what would you communicate as that question I asked before is maybe in three parts. One is, why does St. Louis even exist at a very, meta level, right? What is it that this place is supposed to do and accomplish? For anybody who is here or who would be coming here, what kind of person would you become when you come here, right? What does it facilitate you doing? And then I think the third one is, when you look 10, 20 years down the road, what is it that other cities might be saying about St. Louis from where we are today and where we might be going?
I think it really comes down to, as an oft traveler for youth soccer and other things of my own family, I think it really, we need to dumb this down. Think about it purely in the terms or through the lens of a 72-hour traveler, right? St. Louis has great attractions, unbelievable restaurants, immense physical beauty within 30, 40, 50 miles in any direction. You can you can go to Elephant Rock, right? And
go to Babbler, go 20 miles down the road.
Yeah, exactly. You have all these things, and and when you travel, right, you go and you typically are traveling to water, or you're traveling to a lake, or you're traveling to an urban area, right? And you then, do they have nice hotels? Do they have good restaurants? What's the Yelp scene? Can I go to a theater? Can I do all these things? When you think about it that way, the cities that are desirable, everybody thinks about those cities in those terms first. It's only nerds like you and I that get into the second ring of Mordor, sure, right? In which it's like, okay, well, where's the economic development? Where's the population movement? Where's, what's going on in the neighborhoods? Is it multifamily? Is it single? And then the third layer is, what's the industry? What are people going there for if they're going there? I think we're trying to look at everything all at the same time here. And I think that's our fatal flaw. Because if we did just dumb this down, Jared said it best a couple weeks ago. Hey, Jared, what would you do with the Rams money? Well, I would put billboards in every major city saying, see this beautiful redstone in Tower Grove Heights? You can buy it for $275,000. Yeah. And just really dumb this down to access.
So I totally agree, and I want to disagree a little bit on the priority and magnitude of what you said. I think we do a pretty good job right now of marketing St. Louis as a long weekend. And I've said I'd probably quote me back a decade is the pitch for St. Louis is a long weekend, not a lifetime of success and progress. Because you have all of these amenities, you have all the museums and everything that everybody can list off on the back of their hand. You have the Cardinals, you have the Blues, you have all these things. You have MLS, you have all these things. But I think that's where we kind of stop. And I don't think it is a civic conversation amongst the hundreds of thousands of people in the region for this. But I think I would hope that someone somewhere at least has a perspective on like the third and fourth ring of Mordor, right? Which is the esoteric nature of things. For example, if you look at a strategy pyramid, the top one is why do we exist? And I think right now, if I'm being candid, I think the perspective of why St. Louis exists, if you were to ask most people, is to administer city services. And I think if you asked somebody who was thoughtful enough in a city that is thriving, they would say, this city exists to be a place for you to self-actualize in some way or not. Now, I don't think the general populace gets it,
No.
but that's why they go there, because fundamentally they can look at a place and they understand there's a question being answered like deep down inside, which is, I see something happening in this place over here and it's not occurring where I am, but if I go there, I can become that. And use Miami as an example, right? The reason why Miami is kind of self-perpetuating on this Miami meme, so to speak, is because people say, I want that. And so if I can't be that in Toledo, Ohio, but I can be that in Miami.
Well, I think
aspirationally. And I think for St. Louis, so it's me, right? If this is my pitch, you don't have to actually change anything other than the service delivery. That's barrier to entry. And number two, maybe some policies. But what you have to touch on is, what is this place supposed to do? So for me, if you listen to people around St. Louis, what do we love? We love the affordability. So make it actually affordable at the median wage or below.
Well, what's going on there, though, is also that's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, because, again, we are living in this bifurcated world between city and county, right? And the vast majority of the metropolitan areas that we typically are trying to compare ourselves against, once you start to get into affordability and all these other things, well, the reality is, you start adding in Town and Country and Huntley and Chesterfield and Wildwood, right, and Webster's of the world, et cetera. Well, the affordability is it's not gonna look as rosy as it does when you look at just the city of St. Louis.
I'm talking about just the city of St. Louis, and we can go back on the numbers, which I think is less important. But here's what I'll say about city and counties. I think city and county is a distortion and a distraction. It is a real problem. It's a factual problem. But I don't think it is the magnitude of the problem that people think it is. And I'll tell you why. There's 88 municipalities in Los Angeles County that are incorporated. But you think of Los Angeles as Los Angeles. If you're in Santa Monica, most people, I don't think, who are visiting the pier think to themselves, I am in the city of Santa Monica. Or if they're in Hollywood, they're not sitting there saying, I'm in the city of Hollywood. So I think this whole argument is sort of a non-starter. And frankly, what I would say is, okay, if we think that it is important to merge the city and county, despite the really vocal demands of a lot of even failing municipalities in the county for local control, then what we should really be doing is the city of St. Louis needs to get their own house in order, and they need to take leadership and say, guess what? If the county doesn't want to merge with us, we will make them want to merge with us, right? We're going to glow up and let the county do what they're going to do because they think they have all the answers. We're not going to talk about city-county merger. We're going to have the glow up, and we're going to start attracting the people here until the county gets their act together. And guess what? We can even take the decision right now that if the county would like to merge with us, then the county needs to become a peer to the city. And by peer to the city, I mean, we're not going to go 88-1. We're going to go 8-1. Or maybe the city becomes a municipality within the county, and then we can stop talking about it and see what happens. I think we get caught up in this distraction of all or nothing, or we harken back to the 1850s or 20s, like all of these things. When what it does is it distracts us from saying, right now in city and county on a broad basis, and even in St. Charles, people are voting with their feet and their dollars, and they are leaving this place, this whole region, in a way that is unsustainable. So I think it's all window dress. We're picking out curtains and rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. We really need to be taking a fundamental look and saying, this is a place that has something that we all know.
Well,
we can feel it, but we are just unwilling to say it. We're unwilling to pick a customer. We are unwilling to say that we are going to orient downtown for customer X, and then we're going to go market to customer X.
Well, I think within our overall region, though, there's a whole bunch of macro hypocrisies, such as take St. Charles County, right? They sit back and they laugh and they light up their cheap cigars and rub their bellies and like, look at us, right? Look at our growth. Well, no. You're picking up just kind of neighbors that are a little frustrated. They're looking for a little bit cheaper property taxes or whatever. But let's look at your kids. The next generation. They too are saying, "Go fuck yourself. We're out of here."
Yeah.
Right. So it's all this, like, our whole region is experiencing the same issue. So therefore their brand. Here's where I was going with that. What is the St. Charles brand? We're not St. Louis. I mean, that's not a brand. That's just kind of that's a comic book, clip, which will not last well. Will not last long in the long run.
But what I'll say to that, though, is at this point in their growth, they can afford that. They don't. Where St. Charles County is right now is such that they are still growing, and there is still such demand where. I'm not saying it's a responsible choice, but they're not being forced with an existential threat of ceasing to exist in a lot of ways, the same way that North St. Louis County, North St. Louis is, and frankly, the city of St. Louis is, if you start getting census numbers where we're ducking below 250,000 population.
Oh, I know.
And I think the issue is, and somebody brought up this question over the weekend to me, and they said, well, for all the kind of moaning that the city of St. Louis does about the county, when was the last time people from the city went out to Babbler, or they went out to Rockwood Reservations, or they went out to Klondike Park in St. Charles County? And I think where we get into is there's a let me ask you this question.
Well, no. I'm going to push back on that one because I know like many a person that lives in the city that is close to my age demo. In regards to the question of when was the last time they went west? Well, short of wanting to go hiking. Or if they have an order that they need to pick up at the outlet mall, there's no need.
Is it okay though that would be true also for somebody living in Wildwood?
Yeah, I don't think people in St. Louis are like, why are you not coming to the city?
That's exactly what we hear every day,
I
about like Cardinals attendance or any of the other things. And so,
well, on the sports side, that's way different because what everybody's ignoring is you have an ownership group that's not spending money. We have a bad product on the field.
Well, different subject, but I think if you talk to a lot of urbanists and like downtown supporters, there is a dissonance between I don't think we need to build downtown for people in the county to visit. I think that's a fool's errand. But I think there's also a sense of where do we start blurring the lines between a long weekend, occasional tourists being like going to a Cardinals game, something like that, and people who are living here, and for whom are we developing, and when and what. And I think that's a critical question, and again, it goes back to what is the product of the city of St. Louis? What is it here for? Who will you become when you come here? And what is it like even for somebody in the county to maybe like dip into a little bit of that magic? And if you can create some magic, that's when you're really winning. And so it's the idea of like when you go to Disneyland, you are in a magical place. You're kind of transported.
I think it's time for the city and the powers that be quit trying to placate local. I would come up with a whole new campaign. I would focus on 30 and under exclusively. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to go nationally. We're going to look at our institutions, our universities. We're going to look at our infrastructure from an industry standpoint. Specifically, you can lean into finance very easily because of all the the HQs we have here. You can even get into geospatial and some of these that are a little bit tangent to that. And I would just, again, along the lines of what Jared pointed out and what we've always talked about, The affordability factor. Let's look at housing. Let's look at new units. Let's say, here you go. You want to come here. You can't afford that house in Philly or Miami or wherever you're from. Check this out. And we also know you're a new generation, that you guys are in the gym more often. Well, you want to go hiking? We have all this stuff here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't frame a sentence directed at anybody above the age of 30 and just hammer that over and over, because we need a wave. We need a shift. We're not bringing people back from St. Charles to Lafayette Square.
Totally agree.
So let's quit trying to pretend that's even an option.
Let me see how this lands for you. So I've had a number of conversations about this with people around the region. My view is, I think St. Louis as a business culture, this is not a San Francisco style innovation, consumer technology kind of place. We have a really strong bench for consumer packaged goods marketing. We have an immense infrastructure and expertise in management, movement of goods, trading of commodities, and a lot of the other pieces that go with it. And so what does this tell me? Who would be our likely customer? Well, I'm willing to go on a limb. I don't think a lot of people are doing economic development or business attraction to closely held private businesses, stable niche manufacturing, that could be relocated here, right? Because that's an individual owner that if you said, JB, you've got this business in the middle of nowhere that you inherited from your parents, why don't you come live in a city that's got all these wonderful amenities, will make it worth your while to do so, and then you just come run, you come run it, be close to the talent, do all these things. And we have all the services, by the way, to handle family businesses, to handle family offices, to handle the financial service and legal aspects of that, and make that the priority. And then likewise, I think you're a little bit limiting on your example. I think you are correct in targeting 30 and under, but I think you can also target boomerangs. So you can target empty nesters who are sitting in the county who are saying, I don't have any kids in school. I'm not quite, I got this big 6,000 square foot house. I would like to be down, Tower Grove because I go to the botanical gardens. So how do you create a demand for that? Which, by the way, as somebody who lives in the county, this also creates a market in the county to let young people in so the schools stay good. Because right now, if you have a lot of, empty nesters taking up space in these school districts that are in high demand, that's what's driving up a lot of those property prices. So you're solving a lot of the market forces really just by putting the right functions and the right features and the right seat on the bus and then hitting the gas. And if it doesn't work, hit the brakes, adjust, and go somewhere else. But I think what I'm so concerned about is I don't feel like on a regional or civic level, we are willing to pick a customer, because I think we're intent on our customer as everybody. And I'm really concerned that we are not casting a vision for people outside of this region to imagine themselves here in a way that is inviting or is not insisting on them paying an implicit tax to come here because nobody's here or something else. And I think we need to figure out the way not to make the city exclusive or to make St. Louis exclusive, because I don't think that's what we need to be doing. But I think creating an aspirational product that people want to become part of what we are doing here, and that's going to involve all of the logistical things in a city, but also imagining some really big changes and some really big projects and some really big events that are consistently done. I was thrilled and inspired to see how many people came out for the Go St. Louis Marathon. Did you see those videos?
It's big.
It was huge. So how can we do more of that? Right?
Yeah.
Gateway Cup, great example. How can we do more of that? And instead of trying to spin up something that is new or innovative, let's do the things we know how to do them well, and knock it out of the park.
Well, the reason is, okay, so you have Go St. Louis, you have Frozen 4, which was a couple of weeks back. You have these, a number of events that occur down here. We run into the same issue that we were talking about earlier in the show, where you have this media news bias and, the lack of kind of oversight, or just kind of a board to say, yes, this is real or this isn't. And where I'm going with this is you start to get into the social media realm of counties, and especially St. Charles County individuals that start to talk about the city. Go St. Louis went off without a hitch, right? But what they're going to say is, oh, imagine that, nobody was shot. Instead of saying that's a fucking amazing event that had, tens of thousands of people that came down, that's really, really good for our region, It always has to be, yeah, but.
Well, but we've talked about this too, and I think, look, there's not a lot of competition in St. Louis. What do you have? The St. Louis American, St. Louis Magazine, St. Louis Business Journal,
No,
Post-Dispatch.
I know.
That's to be said is one of the issues we have, I think, when we think about why you have all of these perceptions of a but for or something like that is really because most of the communications are, it's corporate communications, public affairs, public relations, it's press releases, and there isn't a flooding of the zone of true things, right? We can say true things about what it means that there are all of these sinkholes coming up. But there can also be a lot of true things about, look, come downtown on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon, I can't remember which day it was, and look at the Go St. Louis Marathon. See what's going on down here because there's so much positive things happen. And yes, guess what? Coming downtown is a little bit of an adventure. It is not going to be perfect. And I think this goes to framing. We've talked about this, is if you frame everything as it's totally safe, everything's perfect, nothing's going to happen, the littlest thing is going to be like, oh, no, it's broken. Whereas if we say coming downtown from St. Charles is a little bit of an adventure, you are traveling 30 miles. It is a different place filled with different sights, smells, scenes, attractions, people, etc. And prime people for that. I don't understand why we can't use some behavioral economics and basic marketing to define the product in a way that is appealing and attractive.
Yeah, those sights and smells, those are restaurants that are not chain with actual ingredients, by the way. That's what they're experiencing. Had to get that one in there. We've worn out our welcome. We lost every listener a little while back.
They'll be back.
Tell me you're joking. Dave Messner and myself sitting here. We'll probably get you back here maybe same time next week. Because there's a lot of things coming up on the news cycle. A lot of economic numbers that are about to come out that's going to make all of our speculations a little bit more clear over the next 7 days. So everything else good? Family good? Kids
Everything's good. Everybody's good. Man, it is spring. Other than this pollen coating everything, I could not be more excited that we are out of long winter, and hopefully we have some really great things happening in the city of St. Louis County, and that's what I wake up thinking about. It's what I go to bed worried about.
Quick shout out to City St. Louis Institution. Yeah, on Friday night, took the family to Yamanji, Brazil, down in Benton Park. You been there yet?
I have not. Tell me more.
A Brazilian, absolutely phenomenal. Just red meat sizzling on the plate, and plantains and rice and sauces and wines. Empanadas. It was brilliant. You got to go. If you're listening, Yamanji down in Benton Park. Don't worry, there's street parking. So, rolling out of here. New World Order on the way out. Good thing we solved all those problems today. Dave, catch you next time.
You got it.
Like, review, follow, share. See you, people.